Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So I guess if you're watching this, you're thinking about or you're considering buying a film camera or picking up your first film camera off of eBay. Well, there's a few things you really need to pay attention to, and I'm going to go over those things, what to look at and look for before you purchase, and then when the camera arrives, things to check when you get it. Do like a test of the camera, a function test. So you want to check the functionality of certain things the best you can before you even put film into it, because if you buy it the way I'm suggesting and you buy it from the type of sellers that I'm suggesting, then you should be able to return it no problem if it is not functioning as described in the eBay ad. And that's the key there. You need to make sure you understand how the camera is described by the seller, and that you check all of the functionality when you first receive it. And if it's not as described, you need to take advantage of the eBay guarantee and return that camera for your money back, and then look at a different camera. But we'll get into all that. So first, it all comes down to sellers. Make sure you're buying from somebody that specializes or at least sells a lot of camera products. If it's an individual seller, or if it's a company like Robert's Camera or some of the other numerous sellers out there that are actual companies that sell cameras on eBay. But just make sure you are familiar with how they're rated, how much product they've actually sold, so they kind of know what they're doing. And especially if they test their gear. If they test their gear, that's a huge bonus, but we'll get into things like that as we go. But you want, in my opinion, to try to avoid buying cameras that are categorized or listed as 4 parts not working, because you've pretty much eliminated most of your ability to return it if you get it and it's not the way you thought it would be, or it's not in a condition that you felt that you could fix it, because basically you bought it as a parts camera. So the chances of returning it are very, very slim, especially if the seller does not accept returns. So what I would recommend is always purchasing a camera that's under the category of used. Really pay very close attention to the description, because that is basically what you need to know about that camera. If there's anything wrong with that camera outside of the category of used, because used to eBay means that it's functioning as designed and it's functioning properly. So it's up to the seller to list anything under the description that's not working right. So if the meter is not working, they'll put in their meter inoperable, something to that effect. If there's certain dents or dings, they may list that in the description as well. If the light seals need to be replaced, they may put that in the description. So it's your responsibility to make sure you look very closely at the description. Also take very close look at the pictures that are in the advertisement on eBay as well. You need to make sure that if you make a purchase, the camera you receive is the exact same camera that was pictured in the advertisement, because that's the way they're supposed to do it. They're supposed to use actual pictures of what they're selling. So again, if you receive something and it's not as pictured, it can be returned under the not as described category for eBay for a full refund. If you purchase a camera and you get it in and the light meter doesn't work, but there was no mention of that in the description or in the title of the sale, there's nothing in there that said the light meter was inoperable, you can return it as not as described, and eBay will guarantee a full refund if an item is not as described. So you went ahead and you decided to pull the trigger. You found a good seller, they're well rated, they've sold a lot of camera products. So you decided, you looked, and it is listed as used. You look at all the pictures, you look at the description, you feel real good about the camera that you're gonna buy. You're excited about it. So you make the purchase, the camera comes in. So now what? Now what do? You have this camera in hand. There's a few things you need to do right away before you load it with film. Make sure you do these things first, because number one, film costs $10 or more a roll. It costs about $15 to get film developed and scanned, and you don't want to waste $20–25 right off the bat if you could have done a few different function tests immediately to make sure that in your mind everything appears to be functioning properly. Even though the seller in the ad listed as used and functioning and working properly, until you test it, you don't know for sure. So do these function tests first, and that way you'll know for sure if you feel comfortable before loading a roll of film and really giving it a test. So as an example, we're going to use this Nikon F2 camera that was recently picked up and shipped in, and the first thing I did was basic function tests. So first I just did a visual inspection. I took a look at the camera, I looked it over, I made sure the serial number matched everything that was listed in the advertisement. I made sure the condition looked exactly like it did in the advertisement. So I felt pretty comfortable that that was the way it was listed. So I felt comfortable that this was the camera that was listed, this was the camera that I looked at in the advertisement, so I felt good about that. So now you need to do a basic function test to make sure everything's working as it should or as intended. So the first thing is make sure you load fresh batteries, brand new batteries. If you don't have fresh batteries, or if you have a way of testing your batteries with a multimeter, test them to make sure they're fully charged and you're giving the camera good battery, because you don't want to create a problem that doesn't exist. So new batteries, that's what I would recommend to put in the camera. If you don't have new batteries and you have another camera, take the batteries out of a functioning camera that you know is working, put it in this camera, and then start testing things. I mean, test to make sure the film advance works, that the shutter fires, the film counter is advancing. Test different shutter speeds. So does a second sound like a second? Does a half second sound like a half second? I mean, I know these are quarter of a second. Up to about a 30th of a second, you should be able to hear physically the difference. After 1/30th of a second, I have a hard time. But run through each one of the shutters, or the shutter speeds, just make sure the camera's firing at all of those different speeds, which this one appears to be. Now you have fresh batteries. Go in and maybe set the camera to 1/125th. Go in, take a look, make sure your light meter is on, because you want to make sure, oh, I have to turn my camera on. So in this camera, in order to turn it on, you have to pull the advance lever out until the red dot shows. So when I look in here, yes, I can see that my light meter is on, but I don't know if it's accurate or not. But I'm going to change a couple things. I'm going to change my shutter speed to make sure that this light meter changes with the shutter speed, which it does. I also want to make sure this light meter changes with a change in the aperture settings, which it does. So that's a good thing. So the light meter changes with the aperture and the light meter changes with the shutter speed. Now I want to make sure the light meter changes as I change the ISO settings on the camera. Does it also change? So as I change this ISO settings, or ASA, ISO, does the light meter change? And yes, it does. So that's just a quick little test. Now what you can do is you can get really technical. You can go ahead and set up your camera, say at ASA or ISO 100, set it to 1/125th of a second shutter speed, and then set your aperture to 5.6. And that should, if you're looking at something that's a EV value of 12, which is exposure value of 12, that should give you the correct exposure for that particular scene. An EV of 12 at an ISO film of 100 or ISO setting of 100 at 1/125th of a second shutter speed at aperture 5.6 should be the correct exposure. Now you can test your exposure meter against different apps, but sometimes it depends on the app and how it's looking at the entire scene. These cameras, these older cameras, are more center weighted when it comes to exposure. So if you have another camera, like my Nikon FM, that I compared that camera to this camera to check the exposure to make sure it was working properly. So what I did was I took both cameras side by side and compared it to make sure that at least the exposure meter was functioning properly. So we've checked the exposure meter, we've checked the shutter speeds that seem to be firing at all different speeds. What I would recommend as well is open the camera up and make sure you take a look at the actual shutter as it is and make sure it is fully closed and there's no light coming in or anything like that. You want to make sure that shutter fully closes, and when it fires, it fully fires. There's no delay, there's no issues that you can physically see, because we're doing all these function tests or function checks before we actually load the camera with film, because we don't want to waste $10 roll of film, $15 worth of development on something that we could have just did a quick function check. So, and another thing to look at here too is make sure you're checking all the gears. So when you're doing your film advance, make sure everything is moving, so you can tell before you even put a roll of film in that everything should be advancing properly. So those are what I would recommend for basic function tests when you first get a camera in. And if anything appears not to be working, you need to contact the seller and look at getting it returned and getting your money refunded. But now you've done all your function tests, so you're excited. So let's go load some film in it and let's go take some shots so we can really do a test, because we're going to test this camera with a roll of film, develop it, and see how the photos come out, because that's the true test. Again, we didn't want to waste money up front with some quick function tests, but now everything appears to be functioning properly. But now we're going to take it out and test it for real with film, get it developed, and we'll check out the pictures. Hey guys, I am downtown Sacramento outside of Sutter Fort. I have my brand new Nikon F2, well, not brand new, new to me anyway. I have done all my function tests. I'm excited to go shoot some photos with it. I have fresh Kentmere 400 film loaded, so I know the film is fresh. I know the batteries are new. I've went ahead and verified that my ISO is set to 400, so I'm going to eliminate some human error here to make sure that I'm shooting with a proper ISO set to the camera. I also went ahead and made sure the film is nice and tight, so it's loaded correctly. The film is advancing correctly, so we're ready to go shoot. And my goal today is to truly test this Nikon F2 to make sure it's fully functional. So that's why I have fresh film, fresh batteries. I am going to follow exactly what the Nikon F2's light meter is telling me to shoot at. And I am going to try to range from anywhere from 1/15th all the way up to 1/2000th of a second. So I want to test all of the shutter speeds and make sure the pictures, make sure the photos, exposures are coming out correctly. Sutter Fort State Historic Park, and like I said, they don't like tripods and stands and so forth, so you guys are getting the chest mounted POV video style today. So I don't know how this is going to pick up. I am going in some dark spaces here, so if the video doesn't come out, I will just show the pictures. But I want to test this camera. But we're just really looking at exposure right now, so we will see how it comes out. Just trying to test these different shutter speeds. See if we are getting, this will be at 1/60th. the film. It's my typical never advancing the film. Need a little bit more light. I think I'm just gonna leave the camera running, take pictures. Now we're gonna text the 1/80th. That's the kind of the sync speed for the flash. On 2/50th. Just trying to test all these different speeds. All right, that was 1/250th. Maybe I'll get into this corner here. So at 1/500th, f/16, thinking shooting into this area here will probably be fine. Yeah, that looks good. All right, that was 1/500th. 1/1000th. That's a little under. f/8. f/4 looks like it's trying to get the shadow detail here. And this is 1/1000th of a second. And then one more testing at 1/2000th of a second. Then at least we've tested all the different shutter speeds down to 1/15th, which is probably going to be blurry, but then I'll just go shoot some pictures at different speeds, different aperture settings, just testing it out. All right, that was all the different shutter speeds. Yay. So I'm gonna go around and take some more photos and shut the video off now, and I'll just share them all with you at the end of the video.